everyone, how have you all been? I know it's been such a long time since my last video, but I wanted to get back on here and start uploading again. And I wanted to share this cute little gouache painting that I did. I truly believe this is beginner friendly. It has a limited color palette and I used it on watercolor paper, so I think it's very accessible. So if you guys want to try and paint it with me, here are the materials that I use. My paper is just a journal that I got for free from Uniqlo. I believe you can do this on any kind of surface that's not completely thin. And the whole point of this little sketch is to not be too intimidated by the medium of gouache. So that's why I really encourage you guys to use whatever paper that you have. This sketch was done with Color Eno, but you could do this with any pencil or any colored pencil that you have. A lot of it will be covered up by the gouache anyways. And as you can see, my sketch started out not that accurate. A lot of the shaping will be done during the painting process, so it doesn't really matter too much either. The paints that I use are from Holbein, but with the way that we are applying the paint, we can actually use student quality gouache as well, and you will have very similar results. The brushes that I'm going to use are only two. I have one for details and a slightly bigger round brush for the bigger brush strokes, and those are the only two that we will need. As for the colors that we're going to use, I have Prussian Blue, Pale Coral, I have Flame Red, which is my most intense red, and then we have Burnt Sienna, and for our yellow we will use Light Ochre. And that's all the colors you will need. You won't really even be needing white for this. And that's it for all the materials that we need. Today we will be painting this photo that I found on Pinterest, and this and all of the other references that I have used in my videos are all collected in one Pinterest board, which I will be linking in the description as well. So now that we have everything that we need, we can finally start with our painting. We're gonna start off with our biggest brown brush, and we're gonna work only with our Prussian Blue first. And the very main thing that we want to work on is the mapping of the shadows on her. So I'm taking advantage of the very fine point that I can get with this specific brush. And so you'll see that I'm focusing on where these shadows will touch the highlights, trying to get those shapes as accurate as I can get them without overthinking it. We really want to squint at our photo and think of the bigger shapes that her shadow is casting on her, what it leaves out for the highlight. There'll be some areas where I would pass over them with the same Prussian Blue, and so those colors, those shadows will look like they're darker, but mostly we want this Prussian Blue to let our paper breathe underneath. And if you're using thin paper, make sure you're not rubbing your brush right onto that paper and you're just softly depositing that color on there. We don't want to overwork the surface of our paper and damage it if you're using thin paper. And again, the most important thing in this stage is that we get the exact shape of the shadows right here around her eyes. Very important. It just very carefully forms a triangle around there, and it makes her look like she's squinting, so that's important too. And then her hair, we want to make sure that we get that movement right onto this very first layer in our painting. And if you feel like you've messed up in this very first stage, try not to worry about it too much. We are working with opaque paints, so we could just go over them. This stage actually I think is the most important part of the process, but it's not detrimental if you make any mistakes. Look at how I did her mouth right here. I completely painted over that, and that is fine. I will just spread that over to the rest of her face. What's more scary is keeping control of that water and how it's settling onto our paper. Look at how much water is settled on her face right there, and it looks like it might warp our paper and damage it. But while it's still wet, we can actually just move that paint around. So it's very hard to mess this up to a point where it feels like there's no going back. Just try to make sure that you're letting those darker paints settle onto the darker parts of our photo too. And then we should be good to let this dry. Main thing is you have to make sure this is completely dry before we move on to the next part, or we won't be able to really layer over it after. So this is how mine has dried, and I think we have a great foundation for a small portrait with this. So I think now we're ready to move on to our detail brush. And the first color that I'm going to use is the pale coral. It's a very sort of basic skin tone color, and what we're going to do with it is go along the edges of our shadow and to try to shape out the highlights more. So we're cleaning up the lines in the shadows. We're trying to paint her features around them, right here on her eye bags. Very important because they make her look like she's smiling more. The same thing with her cheeks right here. Basically just almost all around our painting. The only things that we're leaving out are where the brightest highlights are going to be, which will really just end up being the white of our paper. And then after that, I'm gonna take my burnt sienna and mix that in with our pale coral, so we get this slightly warmer, slightly darker color. And we're just gonna do the same thing with it, which is work around this shadow color, this time where the colors are slightly darker than where we put just the pale coral in. So we want to be slightly more strategic with where we place this. What we're really doing is adding in these splashes of highlights on top of that very solid block of shadow. And this is very thick paint with our gouache. This may be in the cream consistency. We want to make sure that we're fully covering that solid shadow color. And the same thing here, which is still the burnt sienna with a little bit of the red, not too much of the red though. Just want to make sure that, again, we're slowly painting on just where these highlights are, and as we're doing that, we're also cleaning up the shape of the shadows. I think it started to get a lot more fun when we painted in her red scarf. It's a very bright color, and it also stands out so much on top of the intense shadow. It's my favorite red. Look at how gorgeous it looks on top of it. And then in order for us to get the darker color that will stand out on top of the blue, I'm mixing that Prussian blue in with my burnt sienna, and it should get us this darker, more neutral looking shadow color. It's my favorite combination to use because I think these two colors just really complement each other really well. But we're gonna take that darker color and we're just gonna add dimension to the darkest details that are in shadow. So right here on her eyes, at this point the sketch has almost disappeared completely, so we want to make sure that we are more careful with how we are lining her eyes because they're very important in the photo. And again, most of these other details that are in shadow, we want to keep them very minimal. We want to just paint in where they are the darkest. We don't want to do too much because the main point of this painting is to let this shadow just be one blocky color and for the details in the color to just live in the highlights. So yeah, we are placing these darker lines where we think we will add to the dimension of the shadows. Other than that though, you don't want to add too much on there, just where they are completely needed, and also just by reusing that Prussian blue and on some areas with the burnt sienna. While I was painting this, I didn't really know the direction that I needed to go for this shadowed areas, but I ended up loving the idea of keeping what's in shadow almost monochromatic, and what's in highlight to be very colorful, almost more colorful than it necessarily is in the photo. So we're gonna lean into that and just really add in these details, just really work around with the shapes that we can get on the shadowed areas, especially on her hair. I love the movement on them, so we want to make sure we really play around with that. And then after working on the shadowed parts, I feel like the highlights need a little bit of warmth on there, so I'm going to take our light ochre this time, and I'm then going to use that to add warmth to the highlights. We really don't want to add too much. We don't want to paint too much into the highlights because we want to work with the paper, again, the paper as our brightest highlights. But I do want to take just this light ochre and I want to break apart some of these cooler colors we've placed on her. I feel like it just needs a little bit of warmth, and so I'm making sure that I just place that where I think it needs to be, and then I can then go back with my burnt sienna and then really paint in some more of that warmer brown into her hair strands. There's a part of her hair where it's hit by the light and we couldn't really keep it as the color of the paper, so those are there. Like these hair strands right here, very sneakily are hit by the highlights, so you want to place that there. I also want to get just her expression completely right because it's very delicate, especially right here on her lip, so I'm taking and using my burnt sienna for that. Same thing with her eyebrows. But again, for most of the ones that are in shadow, we really just want to keep it just using the Prussian blue. So when I'm placing in these final hair strands on the shadows, I'm making sure that I'm using the Prussian blue by itself, and then I think I can go back in with more of the light ochre and try to see where I can add in this warmth on her face. But really, I'm really happy with where the painting is already. I'm just now adding in some of the accents, like her hair ties on her hair, making sure that they're the same on both sides. So with the red, very thick paint right here, so it really stands out. But yeah, right there, and then we're just gonna repeat those final steps until we feel like we are happy with the details, and we'll be done with the painting. Look at how simple this one was, and I was really happy with how this one turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed the painting that you guys did. Let me know if you guys like videos like this, was just me talking about my process and painting with you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys again soon.